Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our 6 o'clock Bible Challenge. Tonight we're going to be looking at Proverbs chapter number 23. Proverbs 23. So you can turn there, and while you're turning there, maybe hum along or sing this little chorus with us. God is so good. God is so good. God is so good. He's so good to me. I'll bless His name. I'll bless His name. I'll bless His name. He's so good to me. I'll live for Him. I'll live for Him. I'll live for Him. He's so good to me. He's coming soon. He's coming soon. He's coming soon. He's so good to me. God is so good. God is so good. God is so good. He's so good to me. Well, we're looking at Proverbs chapter number 23. I challenged everybody at our church this past January at the beginning of the year to reestablish a habit of reading God's Word. And this is something often, and then I drifted away from it, and that is using the book of Proverbs like a calendar. And there are 31 chapters in the book of Proverbs, and so there's a chapter that you could read every day of the month. And so for the month of January, on January 23rd, I read Proverbs 23. On February 23rd, I read Proverbs 23. On March 23rd, I read Proverbs 23. On April 23rd, I read Proverbs 23. On May 23rd, I will read, the Lord willing, Proverbs 23. And so you might say, well, why? Why would you read something over and over and over and over and over? Well, if you keep reading it over and over and over, it's going to begin to stick with you, and whether you realize it or not, you are almost going to have parts of this book memorized. You're going to be out and about and doing things and having thoughts and interacting with people, and suddenly God's Word is going to be in your mind. And every time, January 23rd, February 23rd, March 23rd, April 23rd, every time I read this particular chapter, there were verses that jumped off the page at me. A warning. And, well, we're going to look at that in just a minute. But I was outside today, this afternoon, doing a little painting on one of the little buildings we've got here at the house. I was trimming out, and then I was going to put some whiteboards and trim it and make it look really good. And so I had the radio on while I was doing some of that. I had WELD. I had Weld from over in Fisher, West Virginia, playing, and they were playing all kinds of country music, and I was around the corner, and I was listening to a little bit of it, but all of a sudden they promoted, they said, there's a new song by Brad Paisley. And, you know, I think Brad Paisley's got some decent songs. But, and this is my opinion, but when I listened to this song, this was the song, and some of you are going to say, oh, yeah, I know that song. This is the song where he was singing about there's no I in beer. And that we're all in this together. Brad Paisley wrote the song, and he took the old thing there, you know, a coaching slogan, there's no I in team. We're all in this together. And so this song was, I listened to it. I stopped what I was doing just so I could listen. I thought, how sad. Listen to that. It was, one verse was about, well, your team, the team you rooted for, you thought you were going to be champions, and you're listening, you look at the score, and you realize, not this year. It'll have to be next year. And while you're all saddened by all that, you get drinking beer. Another verse is talking about one of his buddies, the girlfriend of the woman he had, she left him, or she broke up with him, and he was heartbroken. And Brad said, well, everybody's been through that. Just get yourself a beer, and we'll all drink beer. That's not a very good idea. And Proverbs 23, I want you to look at it tonight. God has something to say about everything, and this is really good. If you'll just listen and get away from it, look what it says in Proverbs 23, verse number 29. It starts out with a list of questions. It says, who hath woe? Or who's got trouble? Who hath sorrow? Who's got some kind of a problem that's made you sad? Who hath contentions? Those are fights or arguments. Who has that? Who hath babbling? That's like slurred speech. You're just kind of running off, and What we're really talking about is a drunk. The next phrase says, who hath wounds without cause? Somebody that starts drinking, they'll get into an argument with somebody. Nobody was really saying anything, and they take it the wrong one. Oh, we'll whip you. You want to go out back? Come on, man. I want to fight. They want to fight. Wouldn't look for trouble. And who hath wounds without cause? That could be. You wake up the next morning and you've got a big shine or a black eye or a big purple knot on your forehead, and you have no idea what caused that. Who hath wounds without cause, it says. Or who hath redness of eyes? You're drunk so much, your eyes are bloodshot the next morning. I'm telling you, God's got something to say about everything. And so verse 29 lists all those questions. Who hath woe? Who hath sorrow? Who hath contentions? Who hath babbling? Who hath wounds without cause? Who hath... The answer is given in verse 30. They that tarry long at the wine. They that go to seek mixed wine. It gives the answer. Those that go drinking. Those that go looking after the fermented beverage that's really rotting in the bottle or the can, and you put it in your body and it continues to rot, and you think that feels so good. Look at the next verse. 31 says, look not thou upon the wine when it's red, and when it giveth his color in the cup, and when it moveth itself aright. See, that's describing that fermented drink. Don't even look at it, God says. And why? Look at 32. It says, at the last, in the end, it biteth like a serpent. It'll sting you. It'll bite you. And it stingeth like an adder. It's a poison. If you've been drinking, you know exactly what I'm talking about, that hangover sensation. And the next day, it's like, oh, don't talk. Somebody's whispering to you, and you're saying, don't talk so loud. Uh-oh. Someone shuts the car door, and you cringe. I can't go to work today. Oh, my head feels like a pumpkin. You've spent half the night hugging the porcelain throne right there. You've been puking your guts up in the toilet. And so the next verse, 33, says, thine eye shall behold strange women. You go drinking at the bar. You get about half lit, you start looking at the woman down across at the other end of the bar, and you would never, if you were of your sound mind and if you were sober, you wouldn't be talking to her, but suddenly now you're talking to this strange woman, you don't know her, and so it ends up getting you in trouble. There's a warning there. Do you have any idea how many times I've heard some man say and use this excuse, well, I didn't mean to sleep with her. I was drunk. Or how many times some woman that's gotten drunk said to her husband, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't know what I was doing. I was drunk. That's exactly what that verse is talking about. 33 says, thine eye shall behold strange women, and thine heart shall utter perverse things. It'll cause you to end up saying hateful things. It'll cause you to end up saying dirty things. It'll end up causing you to say just all kinds of awful things. Things that you would never, ever want your mother to hear you say. God's warning us. 34, he says, yea, thou shalt be. Here's what you'll be like. You'll be as he that lieth down in the midst of the sea. Oh, everything's going up and down. Oh, everything. The room is spinning. You're staggering across the room. You're like the guy, if you tried to walk in a boat across there while it was in the ocean, you could lose your balance. That's what it's talking about. Or you're as he that lieth upon the top of a mast. You can't lie on top of a mast. You can't do it. I heard of a guy that came home drunk and the ironing board was set up in the living room. He climbed up on it, thought he was going to sleep on the ironing board. Rolled off. That's what this is like. You lose your balance. It's like you've gotten seasick and the room's spinning. 35 then says, you end up saying these kind of things. They have stricken me. Who punched me? You wake up the next morning and maybe you got a broken nose. Your lip split. You got a couple teeth missing. But they have stricken me, shalt thou say. And I was not sick. I'm not sick. You know how many drunks? I'm not. What do they mean? I can close the bar. They can't cut me off. I'm not drunk. They have beaten me. You get beat up. You mean drunks have been in a fight? And then it says they've beaten me and I felt it not. Sometimes you can get so drunk somebody knocks you down 10 times and you keep getting up because you don't feel anything. It's like you're impossible to knock out. That's not good for you because just because you can't feel the pain doesn't mean you're not going to feel it the next day. And then it says, when shall I awake? My goodness, you go home and man, when you go to sleep, you're like a bear that's sleeping for the whole winter. Who knows when you're going to wake up? Those verses in in Proverbs 23, they're really sad verses. And every month when I come across this chapter, I've been thinking about what it meant as I was reading. I don't drink. I never have. And I'm glad I don't. And I'm glad I never have. Because these verses that we just looked at describe the road you go down if that's what you're doing. And if you're drinking and you say, that stuff never happens to me. The devil's fooling you and you don't even realize it. The devil makes you think that you're the exception to the rule. See, God said it'll bite you like a snake. It'll sting you like an adder. It doesn't say sometimes. It doesn't say once in a while. It doesn't say unless you're too smart for that. It's going to bite you. It's going to sting you. The best thing you could do is to get away from that strong drink. I want you to see one more thing. It's the saddest thing of what we just read. These verses are really pitiful. Look at the last phrase of the chapter. After all that's been said, here's the last phrase that the drinker says. I will seek it yet again. The alcoholic started with that first drink. And now all he thinks about is, how can I work my schedule so I can get me that next drink? I will seek it yet again. You can go through all these troubles that have just been described in Proverbs 23, and yet at the end you'll say, we want to do it again next weekend. Don't be fooled. Give it up. Ask God to help you. If you've never started, here's one of my sayings. If you don't start something, you never have to stop. Stay away from strong drink. Have a blessed evening.